Hi there, I'm Sharon, and today we're going to do story number 2. Last week, remember, we did horse muffins, where the true story of where I was slathered in horse muffins trying to perform professionally as a funeral director, a beginning funeral director. Well, today I'm going to share another true story. It is called Blessed Be the Tie That Binds. Now remember, I said before, death is never funny, but I did learn in Texas that some morticians are just plain nuts. I may be one of them. The following story is based on the truth. Now, I will emphasize, you know me, that I have exaggerated the humor, but the actual incident really is true. The characters are developed from real people. They're actually a conglomeration of friends, family, and in a few instances, associates. Granger Barestone was a young teenager who worked at our funeral home, and he really wanted to impress the boss's daughter, Marilyn Pressman. You'll remember from last week, Beauregard Wieneman is based on one of my sizable uncles who really did have a glass eye. It was more than a little distracting to me when I was a child because I never really knew which eye to follow. Each eye would be looking a different way. The relatives I described were very distinct, but also very well loved. This is a typical story about a young man who wants to impress a young lady. Sounds pretty typical, doesn't it? Well, the setting is a funeral home, and what happens is not typical at all. Now to my story. Normally, on any other Texas day in July, Granger Barestone, would suffer the sun roasting his eyeballs like 2 campfire marshmallows. But today, he would not be the young man who simply directed cars where to park on the black asphalt that circled the funeral home. Today would be his emancipation. He gazed at Marilyn Pressman, the owner's daughter, standing at the back of the funeral home. She was 17 too and would be in his senior class at Robert E. Lee High this fall. He hoped she would go to the Dallas Mortuary College with him after graduation. Granger nervously fidgeted with his tie, ran his fingers through his dark curly hair, and pulled himself up to his full 5'7" stature in his gray faux lizard cowboy boots. Granger breathed deeply. Yes, sir, he looked handsome today. This was the first funeral Marilyn and he would work together. Actually, it was his first funeral, but he had rehearsed how to walk, how to talk, and how to appear sensitive in the mirror when he got dressed. He was so grateful that 2 of the funeral directors who were to work the funeral today had food poisoning. Not serious, but Pressman certainly couldn't have them hurling for distance at the funeral. That wouldn't be dignified. Plus, it was his big chance. Today, Marilyn would see him in a suit rather than his usual grass-stained mowing jeans. Tonight he would chance it and ask her out to a movie. Maybe, if she was lucky, someday old man Pressman would call him son-in-law. Granger smiled as the organist began playing "Blessed Be the Tie That Binds." This was his Nana's favorite hymn, and she always snuggled him close as she sang. She never missed a Sunday morning service, and consequently, neither did he. Beauregard, a licensed funeral director, and Granger walked in unison to the front of the chapel where they faced the open casket. The organist held the last note, a signal that it was time for the casket to be closed. Beauregard lifted the red rose arrangement, held it to the side, and whispered, "Okay, Granger, close the casket." Granger leaned over to the casket to grab the lid. His face flushed as he envisioned Marilyn watching his every movement. This would be one of those special moments for them to relive over and over years down the road. This day was going to be a moment in history. When he stretched to grab the top of the lid of the casket, his tie escaped from his suit coat and blatantly twitched its tail across the nose of the deceased. Granger's mind was off thrashing dragons. Instead, he should have been babysitting his tie. He closed the casket. Beauregard repositioned the rose spray in the middle of the closed casket while Granger waited respectfully, facing the casket. Beauregard stepped to the end of the casket where he began slowly rotating the casket key. Now, a casket key is a device that looks like a shiny Allen wrench. When locked, the casket is impossible to open without the key, and locking the casket helps prevent outside elements from entering the casket. Granger heard the lock catch and nodded to Beauregard. Beauregard turned his back to the casket to face the mourners, folded his hands in front of him, and lowered his obedient eye to the floor as he had done hundreds of times before. He never took responsibility for his glass eye. It had a mind of its own and wandered wherever it pleased. Therefore, he always kept his eyes closed and down. Well, at least one eye was riveted to the floor. Granger prepared to straighten up, turn around, and stroll to Beauregard's side. Oh, he was proud, very proud, because he knew Marilyn and the entire congregation would have their eyes centered on him, and he could handle the pressure. It was then it happened. The unforeseen, the unpredictable, the unplanned, the event that would alter Granger's teenage life forever. Granger's fingers theatrically caressed the closed mahogany casket. He positioned his right toe behind his left heel as he performed routinely in the marching band. Paused dramatically, and in a burst of energy whirled around. Nothing could have prepared him for what was going to happen next. His eyes had just locked on Marilyn's when his tie whipped his head back around, thumped it down kerplunk on top of the casket, cascading his body in replicated spastic ripples. His esophagus gurgled and bubbled a cawing noise. Panic encircled Granger's brain. Unnerved, he violently struggled to untangle his legs, but in the fracas, he overcompensated, and when he freed his rowdy right leg, it inadvertently lunged upward, causing him to straddle the casket. He clamped shut his eyes while his entire body lay nearly horizontal on the back of the casket. His knuckles turned white as he clung onto the casket, rhythmically teetering back and forth, slowly rocking to a stop. The audience gasped. He strained to open his eyes, attempted to focus, and slithered off to dismount. He desperately yanked at his tie, willing it to be freed from the casket. It refused. The audience sat mesmerized like an audience watching a bull rider with his gloved hand caught in the braided rope handhold. Time moved, but they were motionless. Beauregard heard a ruckus behind him. However, he never lifted his face to prevent his glass eye from causing an uproar. Psst, psst, help me. Psst, 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 help me. Granger strangled out. I'm trapped in this casket. These pleadings caused Beauregard's knees to fuse. Don't faint, don't faint, don't faint, he thought. The deceased is dead. This can't be happening. His body paralyzed with black terror. Psst, psst. What's wrong with you? Can't you hear me? Get me out of this casket. Beauregard pried his one cooperative eye off the chapel casket and carpet and forced himself to look at the spectators. The group blurred. Blood rushed from his head. He had trouble concentrating and he swayed back and forth. His right eyebrow twitched. Perspiration basted his forehead. He blocked everything out of his mind. Do not faint, kept ricocheting in his head. Beauregard tried to clear his throat to respond to the whisper, but no sound came. Only a rush of air. Whispering makes me dry. The voice behind him bellowed. I can't breathe locked in this casket. Beauregard gulped in several breaths. His body shivered. His feet cemented themselves to the floor. Beauregard, either haul your butt over here and liberate me, or I'll lug this casket over to you. Now move. Beauregard roused. He understood threats when he heard them. His first instinct was to run, but he wasn't sure how fast the body in the casket could sprint. Put the key in the casket and unlock it now, the voice demanded. Head down, Beauregard budged his right leg. He steadied it with both hands and then shifted his left leg. Slowly, obediently, he turned to the end of the casket. The casket key clinked as Beauregard repeatedly tried to ram it into the casket hole with his trembling fingers. Finally, the latch opened. Hands sweating, Granger jerked open the casket, reached in and yanked out his tie, now etched with a permanent horizontal crease. Granger shoved down the lead and rasped, "Crank it down." Beauregard pried his eyes up from the carpet for a moment, long enough to see the ocean of distorted faces in front of him. He obeyed the voice from the casket. Granger strained to stand up straight. After enduring what seemed to be, to him, an endless semi-squatting position, Granger croaked, "Beauregard, put the key back in your pocket and go over and face the mourners." Beauregard complied. His mind was mush. Granger turned and hobbled over to Beauregard. And then the odd couple shuffled down the center aisle. Granger did not bother looking at Marilyn. This was not the night to ask her out. Another night, maybe. But definitely not tonight. Remember, my friends, this story is based on an actual event that did happen during a funeral service. Now, I have exaggerated the humor, but the tie was imprisoned, and the whispering did unsettle the funeral director. In these trying times when we all need to laugh a little, I hope you enjoyed this story. Have a blessed day. I will talk to you later.